So we're going to move on to three presentations from some of the graduate researchers in the ALiGN lab. So first up, I'd like to introduce you to Cathy Dawson. Cathy is a PhD student and Vanier Scholar in Communications and a founding board member with the LGBTQ Rainbow Umbrella in Montreal. Oh, no.
Part of my research interests includes examining how people living with poverty are presented, and in many cases, misrepresented in both social and mainstream media. I'm looking at the construction of narratives about those living with poverty through government policy and datification through big data approaches to monitoring and surveilling those living on social assistance. One of my projects with the lab includes interviewing people who've experienced poverty or live on social assistance or have lived on social assistance and asking them about the social stigmas that they believe they face. To offer them an opportunity to share their stories for an ongoing podcast project we're currently developing in the lab that is focusing on creating a platform for some of these voices to be heard. We all read those newspaper headlines, maybe some of us even read the actual body of the full article itself, and we also see those terrible poverty-bashing memes that are so popular on Facebook and other social media. I'm sure no one here today looks at any of those poverty-bashing memes, or even the ones that are circulating on social media, and think for even a second that it's a fair or accurate representation of those people. And I'm sure we also know how misleading and unfair those newspaper headlines that announce new policies or government initiatives on new methods for combating welfare fraud often are. We understand that these only serve to further criminalize the poor. But what do those who do live with poverty think about all of these poverty-bashing memes when they see them circulating, and other common negative stereotypes about them being circulated in mainstream media? What's it like to live on the receiving end of that kind of misrepresentation, that kind of negative characterization? I recently sat down with two women who grew up on social assistance as children and still struggle in many ways with poverty today as adults. I asked them two questions. First, what are some of the common misconceptions people seem to have about those living with poverty from their perspective, the people who are actually in poverty? And two, what do you wish you could say to them? Here's a bit of what they had to say.
The thing that I feel is portrayed that's wrong is that people want to be in poverty and we don't. That's not true.
They already have
Preconceived ideas about you.
Yeah, they have a preconceived idea of you, so right away they don't like you, and so right away you have that strike against you, so then you have a hard time getting a job from them. And because of what we've been through, we've learned to fight for each other.
We're very strong.
Yeah.
So when you hear or you sense that you think people think it's a choice, like how does that make you feel?
Makes me so sad.
It's very disheartening.
Because how do you fight that?
So if you had the attention of all those people who you know are judging people in poverty, and they would really be listening, what's the one thing that you wish you could say to them?
Please, just give us a chance.
And that's a critically important part of our mission here at the Media Lab, to provide a platform, to give that chance to some of these voices we might not be hearing from, at least not nearly often enough. Both of the women I spoke with talked about how poverty is often viewed as somehow a choice, that those on social assistance, welfare, see it as an easier life and actually prefer to have a handout than a job. And both of them talked about how judged they often feel for having, for example, a cell phone, or even where they live. And I only played a very short segment of the actual interview. So how do those living in poverty, or at least the two women I interviewed here on tape, feel about the public's perception of them? In this particular case, they made it clear that it certainly only adds to their further marginalization. And I don't know about you, but I certainly want to hear and learn more about their experiences and their perceptions. And this is why I'm so pleased to be part of the ALiGN Digital Media Lab. We're going to facilitate more of these voices and alternative narratives coming directly from the people who matter most. Those people who are actually living the lives that we keep hearing and reading about, but too often from sources other than from them directly. And for that alone, I'm really excited to be involved with helping to continue forging these important relationships with these people in the community. Thank you. And now I'd like to bring Nazreen back to the stage and turn this back over to her. Nazreen is a fourth-year PhD student here at Carleton in Communications and a board member with the Women's Initiatives for Safer Environments Ottawa.
Thank you, Cathy. Right. So while I was a master's student, I shared with a faculty member my interest in examining young women's experiences with particular feminist online spaces. And she seemed confused at first, and then with some sudden revelation told me about her fears about her teenage daughter being online. She then asked me very seriously and with great concern, "You're going to shut down Google, right?" So at first I was taken aback at this reaction. So beyond her conflation of Google and the internet, which is a rabbit hole we won't go down today, her knee-jerk reaction that online spaces are bad places needing to be shut down disheartened me. This anecdote demonstrates a common narrative around online spaces for women. When we are reminded that information highlighted in popular culture about the internet and women is pretty one-sided. That is, the characteristics or affordances of many applications on the internet, especially with Facebook and Twitter, are being used by perpetrators in ways that further amplify their abuse. GPS location settings allow perpetrators to easily stalk others. Email, social media accounts, often public information, can easily be flooded with hate. One's own personal information and images can just as easily be shared with so many others for even further humiliation. So yeah, okay, it kind of makes sense that many women, even minorities, have been abandoning these platforms altogether, or are reinforced to be afraid of accessing such online spaces. But because our lives are so engrossed and intertwined in online technologies for things other than just for socialization, abandoning online spaces is just not fruitful. But such violence didn't begin with and isn't confined to the commercialization and spread of the internet. So as another common response in ending violence against women, a fashion designer in Japan created this dress that helps women avoid being sexually assaulted by turning them into a vending machine. So this dress is, of course, culturally specific and could work for somewhere in a big city like Japan, where there are vending machines everywhere. So yeah, you could easily disappear with this. So although the campaign may seem a little bizarre to some of us, this example highlights stereotypes of ending violence against women in that assaults only happen by strangers, and that the responsibility to end violence against women falls to women themselves instead of to the perpetrators. But really, we all have complicated relationship with technologies. Online spaces and digital technologies are also used to support victims, survivors, and help bystanders intervene in instances of violence. My research wants to push back on both of these two common narratives, so that women should be abandoning online platforms and that violence against women is the responsibility for potential victims to resolve. Many nonprofit activist groups have built their own online spaces in the form of mobile applications, games, websites, to prevent and intervene in instances of violence against women and minorities, because the internet is not just Google or Facebook and Twitter. So for instance, the internet is also HeartMob. This online platform, coded and designed with the intention of being anti-oppressive, is informed by survivors of violence and relies on bystander intervention strategies. So anyone can go on, you can see who needs help and support, what kind of support they need, and if you're able to provide those resources, you can go and help someone else. So this brings in the larger community being involved. And my research wants to open up this door to such alternative ideas about online spaces, digital technologies, and their potentials. So although our work here may be critical of the internet, we're not going to shut down Google. But my research hopes to shed some light on the ways in which online spaces can be reimagined as spaces free from violence. Thank you. while I'm up here, I would like to introduce you to our final member of our research team, Scott Mitchell. So Scott is a third-year PhD student in communications and is currently instructing a course on communication in science. He is interested in public communication of science, risk communication, social and digital media platforms, and visual culture.
Thanks, Nessie. First off, I'd like to ask a question. Who here checked the weather before leaving their home this morning? It's a fairly common morning routine, along with checking the news or your email. A company called SickWeather wants to add something to that morning routine. They want you to check to see your chance of contracting a contagious disease that day. So if you download the SickWeather app on your phone, you see something like this, a map that shows the location of nearby sick people. The app collects information from social media and across the web, as well as self-reports from its users. As the website proclaims, just as Doppler radar scans the skies for indicators of bad weather, SickWeather scans social networks for indicators of illness, identifying sick zones to help keep you and your family safe. A future version of the app will even allow users to see which of their friends are talking about being sick on Facebook and Twitter. You'll notice that this map shows our current location, and yes, there are apparently a bunch of sick people around Carleton's campus, so you might want to wash your hands or use some Perel before helping yourself to refreshments later. One of my research interests involves studying these digital disease tracking tools, in particular platforms such as SickWeather that depend on contributions from networks of users, or crowdsourcing. One consideration for these kinds of tools, which are becoming increasingly prevalent, are the privacy concerns, of course. There's shockingly little oversight or regulation surrounding the collection, storage, and transmission, and ownership of this personal information. But perhaps more importantly, how does this influence or shape the way we conceptualize things like disease, or health, or public health? Past research on risk perception has shown that it's shown the difficulties in communicating disease risk to the public with tangible real-world public health repercussions. If we look back at the Ebola Crisis in 2014, misplaced fears of a domestic outbreak in North America mobilized support for travel bans and cutting off medical aid to West Africa, measures that ironically placed the public at a greater risk of infection. You might be asking yourself, if something like SickWeather depends on people making self-reports, how accurate can it be? There might be a bunch of hypochondriacs on there skewing the data. And I argue that that's actually besides the point. For one thing, I argue that SickWeather is representative of a broader cultural trend towards representing and tracking diseases in particular ways, with health agencies creating and adopting their own similar tools increasingly. Secondly, the fact that people are using and believing in something like SickWeather is what matters, regardless of whether Carleton's campus is currently infected like a zombie apocalypse movie. Despite trying to promote itself as a public health tool, apps and services like SickWeather, with their calculations of risk, live updating maps, disease alert notifications, might help create a public perception of disease threat as an omnipresent, inescapable reality, placing contagion fear in your pocket or the palm of your hand. Alerted by a sound from your phone, at any moment, your supposed disease risk can change and instantly make itself known. Much of my work with the ALiGN Media Lab is about public perceptions of science and health issues. One of the goals of the lab is to try to make research more accessible and engaging through a variety of platforms and channels, blog posts, illustrations, videos, interactive timelines, and more, in a way that doesn't reinforce outdated ideas about ignorant publics and elite experts, but rather in a way that creates opportunities for dialogue and exchange. Anyway, better get going soon. My phone's telling me there's a bunch of diseases around. Thank you.